Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Youssef Munayer. I'm the Executive Director here at the Jerusalem Fund and its educational program, the Palestine Center, which is bringing you this event today. Before we get started, I just wanted to make a couple of housekeeping announcements about upcoming events. First, if everyone could turn off cell phones or anything that makes noise so that we can give our full attention to our speaker today, that would be much appreciated. We have a few events coming up in a row that I wanted to make sure everybody knew about. If you had a chance to see the table on the way in, you may have seen some of the flyers, but I just want to go through these quickly because they are very interesting events coming up in rapid succession over the next few weeks. Next Friday, the 22nd of January, we have Dr. Osama Kanaan, who's the IMF Chief of Mission in the West Bank and Gaza, who will be talking about the Palestinian economy and recent experience and prospects for 2010. So that should certainly be a very interesting lecture. Then that evening, as you may have seen on your way in, some of the burlap and dark cloth hanging from the walls. We have an outstanding exhibit, our first exhibit for 2010 by Elena Farsakh called Palestinians. Meanwhile, you may have seen the postcard, and if you have a chance to take a look at it, it should be out on the table, and that is January 22nd, again, the opening on Friday, January 22nd from 6:30 to 8:30 p.m., and it will go through February 26th. So you have many opportunities to check out some of those fabulous photos. On the 27th, we have a colleague of Dr. Brown's from George Washington University, Ilana Feldman, speaking on humanitarianism and whether or not humanitarianism is prolonging the Palestinian plight. That is Wednesday, the 27th of January from 12:30 to 2. And then on Tuesday, the 9th of February, we'll have Mr. Bill Corcoran, who is the head of ANERA, Americans for Near East Refugee Aid, who has recently returned from the Gaza Strip to give us an update about the conditions on the ground over there. Again, Tuesday, February 9th, 12:30 to 2. So we have a bunch of events coming up, and we look forward to seeing you at all of them. So with that being said, let us proceed with our event today. I wanted to give you an idea about what piqued my interest in asking Dr. Brown to talk to us at this time. I read something he had written recently, which I found to be right on target. He writes, "The commonalities between the late Bush approach and the early Obama approach far outnumber the differences. They amount to a West Bank first strategy of building up the Ramallah government, pursuing Israeli-Palestinian diplomacy in support of a two-state solution, and ignoring Hamas on the assumption that allowing the improvement of Gaza will bring Palestinians to their senses." At the current time, with the divide that we see, one has to ask the question, what role is U.S. policy playing in the inter-Palestinian divide? And I've asked Dr. Brown to talk to us about this subject today. Dr. Nathan Brown has a PhD in Near Eastern Studies from Princeton University, and he teaches courses on the Middle East as well as courses in comparative politics and international relations, and he's the author of a number of publications on domestic Arab politics, both in Egypt and in Palestine. And in 2009, Dr. Brown was selected as a Carnegie Scholar by the Carnegie Corporation, and during this grant, he takes a look at the impacts and increased participation of Islamist groups in electoral politics. So please join me in welcoming Dr. Nathan Brown.
Thank you very much for having me over here, and thanks to all of you for showing up. I'm supposed to be talking about U.S. policy towards this Palestinian split, but I'm going to take the first part of that topic and put it aside for a minute, the U.S. policy part, for a couple reasons. First, I do live in the United States of America. I live very close to here. But sometimes what U.S. policy is, I find slightly confusing, so I'd like to kind of postpone having to deal with it. But the other reason that I want to put it aside for a minute is that I think Washington discussions sometimes make a little bit of a mistake. They start right with the policy prescription and work backwards from the prescription to the reality. That's good if you have perhaps 750 words for an op-ed piece, but I've got a little bit more than 750 words, so I'm going to spend the first part of them looking not at U.S. policy, but looking instead at realities on the ground. So what I'm going to start doing today is to ask, what is this split between the West Bank and Gaza? Then I will take a look and see what U.S. policy has been. Then I'll take a look and see what will happen if U.S. policy does not change. And finally, I'll examine the question of whether there are alternatives that would be more advisable for the United States to adopt. First, what is this split? Between the West Bank and Gaza. Well, in a sense, it's one that is too obvious to deny, and its basic contours are extremely clear. It is routinely described as a split between the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah and Hamas in Gaza. I think that's a misleading way. I've said repeatedly that's a misleading way, however, to conceive of the split because it misses some important things. It's a terminology that's routinely used here. It's actually sometimes used by Palestinians as well. It's even used sometimes by Hamas people, where they refer to the authority as if it is something in Ramallah. But much more frequently, however, Hamas essentially says we're the legitimate elected majority in the Palestinian parliament. The constitutionally legitimate parliament cabinet is the one headed by Ismail Haniyeh in Gaza. And the cabinet is not the cabinet for Gaza, although it only has effective control there, but in legitimate terms, in terms of internal Palestinian legitimacy, it is the Palestinian Authority. Now, they have some legal legs to stand on there, which I don't think anybody cares about so much anymore. But what you miss if you miss that, I think, is, if you conceive of it instead as sort of the Palestinian Authority versus Hamas, is you miss the extent to which Hamas is, you write out of the equation the fact that Hamas actually is a governing authority in Gaza right now. There are ministries, there are decrees, there are laws, there's a political process that is now very, very deeply entrenched and will not go away very easily. You also miss that Hamas in a sense sees itself that way. You miss a little bit about Hamas's self-conception of properly representing governance in the territories controlled by the Palestinian Authority. And you miss the fact as well that in a sense, this legal reality, which I say that nobody cares about, has essentially left the Palestinians with two lawless, unaccountable, undemocratic governments. I say lawless because both of them are operating without any regular constitutional foundation. And I say undemocratic because although there were Palestinian elections, and although Mahmoud Abbas can claim that he is the elected president by the majority of the Palestinian people, and Hamas can claim its own democratic legitimacy from the 2006 parliamentary elections, the prospect of new elections is simply not there under current political circumstances. And again, even this dispute, I think, is often misframed. That essentially Abu Mazen decreed elections and Hamas refused to implement the decree. There is some truth to that, but if you dig a little bit deeper, the conflict looks a little bit more severe. Abu Mazen did issue a decree that called for new elections for the presidency and the legislative council, but what is left out of most news accounts is the fact that he did so on the basis of an earlier decree law that essentially barred Hamas from running. It would be illegal for Hamas candidates to run under the Palestinian electoral law that Abu Mazen claims is legitimate.